All right, everybody. Welcome to the February 12th Crowbar Planning Sprint. There's a couple of topics that we can go through. Typically, what we want to do is review the past sprint for usually 10 or 15 minutes, and then start talking about what we need to unravel. And we've, in waiting for the call to start, started lining up a couple of items to talk about. Cool. All right. So I know there was a lot of stuff done in prepping for OpenCrowbar migration. The most significant to me is that we can actually run a Docker admin node with VMs as targets. I'm working on. I've been documenting that. I'll actually show. This is my version of the documentation. I haven't done a pull for it. But if you want to look at, this is the temporary docs location there. What I'm trying to do, so this Docker admin, it's pretty cool. It actually uses a Chef solo install that should be able to be used both in Docker and outside of Docker. But you can, with one command, you can actually go to a full dev environment or a full production environment in a clean CentOS 6.5 container. It sets up Postgres, it attaches to it, it does all the build, all the infrastructure, everything like that. So seems like a really fast, clean way to get all the way through to an admin node, and it replaces the old workflow of do a build, create an ISO, use that ISO to bootstrap a VM, install Crowbar on that VM. All those steps are gone. We jump straight into a working Crowbar, and then what I'm trying to test and document right now is getting that admin server connected to the network. Victor does it. He has some tools to do it, but his environment is different than most of ours. So I'm trying to make one that's more standard, and I've been documenting that. I started with a completely clean Ubuntu environment, and then I've been trying to very carefully document all of the work for that. My syntax is wrong. That's necessary to bring all these things up, including the actual Git workflows. Since we're not using DevTool now, you actually need to manually commit. Well, you always have to commit rebase, fetch, the Git push process. You actually use Git push to a personal master and then create a pull request. I'm finding it very easy, like easier than DevTool, and so I'm pretty excited about that. All right, so that was a big one. I know that Uncle's been making progress on the RPM install. It's RPM package, really.
I'll talk about that when we're ready.
You want to do it briefly?
Yeah, sure. So I'm doing the RPM packaging for CentOS. It's platform specific now,
okay.
Not platform neutral. And when you install the OpenCrowbar core RPM package, it will automatically, it has dependencies on PostgreSQL and Ruby. It will make sure that those are installed before it installs itself. After it installs the package, it sets up the Crowbar service. It runs the bootstrap script that Victor wrote for the Docker container. I have some patches to that so that it can identify the CentOS platform correctly, and then run the install script. If Ruby is not installed, if the correct version of Ruby is not installed, it will do an RVM installation of Ruby. Our objective, of course, will be to make sure that Ruby is correctly installed. It will set up PostgreSQL and get all of that running. And then the very last thing that will happen is it'll start the Crowbar service. So at that point, you should be able to connect to the web UI and use it. That's it in short.
That's good. So those things are moving forward. One of the things to talk about in this is we haven't talked about how to attach a workload.
That's right.
Oops. So that would be something like OpenCrowbar, or Hadoop. I don't think these are big deals, but I actually think it's easier than it used to be. But we have to figure out how to attach them. Not actually install them. Is more the right answer. So one of the major design requirements here is that you don't have to create a dedicated ISO.
So the other design requirement is that by the time we ship a release, we want to be able to install an update RPM for any of the OpenCrowbar components, and it should seamlessly upgrade rather than having to reinstall everything. And I should just clarify, I used the wrong term. I should say update, which provides a later revision of a package. Upgrade assumes a discontinuity.
You're reminding me of a couple of things that I hadn't mentioned before that are important. One that Victor switched us to online mode in OpenCrowbar, meaning that since the ISO did a lot of work to pre-stage a whole bunch of RPMs and packages and things like that, but that's not true anymore. Thank you. Without the ISO build, so Crowbar 2, the OpenCrowbar code actually uses networking, believe it or not, to download and install packages. Amazing. And so what you'll find is if you use OpenCrowbar, it will go and download packages that it doesn't have. So this was actually a conversation I know on the team about how to get packages and what would happen and things like that. And in Crowbar 1, there's always been a considerable amount of effort to pre-stage the correct packages, and from a developer perspective, it's always been a bit of a burden if you add something to go cache it. So that we still want to capture things in the YAML files, but it's not a requirement from a development perspective at this point. And also, as part of getting the Docker admin node working, Victor pulled Sledgehammer code over, so the first thing that happens when you go to run the Docker admin node is going to spend about an hour building Sledgehammer for the first time. It doesn't put it in the container, so it's persistent. Sledgehammer, there's now a Sledgehammer build for OpenCrowbar, which is necessary.
So that's something that's going to have to go into an RPM package.
Ultimately, yes. Or it needs to be part of a install process where you download,
right.
where it's things that you download. It probably has to go in the RPM package.
Let's just talk briefly about the workflow for actually getting an admin node operational.
Okay.
That will involve first doing a basic server install of CentOS 6.5.
You've documented this somewhere, but
CentOS 6.5 basic server.
okay.
And then we have to install whatever repo info we need to pull from. And then there'll be an OpenCrowbar install RPM that you'll install. It'll be a yum install OpenCrowbar-installer. And that'll be OpenCrowbar-installer.
Okay.
And that should do the total installation and hand you a system with a running web UI. That's the intent, anyhow.
This has to include database config.
It's done automatically.
Right.
Yep.
And so inside of this, there'll be a Chef Solo. The plan is we're going to use Chef Solo to do the configuration. And it uses the package dependencies to make sure we have the right pieces right.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And then, actually, and once this runs, inside from Crowbar, there's, we use the jigs to do the config surfaces. So that once you're actually running that admin server, the jig then goes and sets up additional networks. It sets up a whole bunch of NTP, DNS, DHCP servers. All that.
Right. Any questions on that?
Just to point out, just more query. Is this planned for the next sprint, or is this just where we're going in general? I'm just trying to clarify what's in the next sprint versus what's there versus what we're doing in the
I'm
future.
hoping to have the RPM packaging basically done today,
Okay.
if that answers your question.
Most of it's complete.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to check. Most of this is complete. That was my understanding.
Were you on the call yesterday? I demonstrated the package building.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was.
Okay, so the package is built, no problems at all. The problem I had is I was trying to launch all of this stuff manually still, because I didn't have all the dependency handling in what I had checked in and built the packages from. And it failed yesterday to bring up the UI because the Postgres gem would not install. But that is resolved once you run the Bootstrap system.
Okay.
So what I think I may do today, once I've got that working, is I'll invite people to a quick demo so that they can see that it's running.
We trust you, John.
I don't.
This is very small down in the weeds. One of the things that we talked about in one of the videos is that you could use role names that didn't comply with role class names, that didn't match the role naming pattern. And that code is not in, but I have a pull request that should have it. I need to write some tests to validate that it works. Virginia had asked about this specifically. For now, you have to follow the naming convention. Okay. Other status items that people want to give on the call? I know we've got a lot of people coming up to speed.
I think on my side, I'm going to shift to docs in the next sprint. There's a couple of things we need to do there. But as for current status, I haven't touched anything in this current sprint.
Good. Cool. So with that, why don't we switch to upstream and Berkshelf, and then we'll come back and talk about OpenCrowbar migration. So that doesn't become the only thing we talk about. Let's see, and if we need to, I can talk about this. Yeah, we're still owed a couple. All right, let's go ahead and talk about cookbooks, and I'll take notes. Dave, you want to kick that off?
Sorry, I was muted. So we need to figure out the design for using the upstream cookbooks in both our build environment and in when we deploy. So what we're picturing is having a Berks file and a Berks lock file in each bar clamp. And at build time, you would go out and fetch any cookbooks that aren't already cached on the build server and pull them from the upstream repositories, then cache them locally on the build server.
Why would you cache it?
Then the next move.
I'm
sorry?
So you're saying at build time you'd cache the appropriate files?
This is what I'm picturing. Now, this is where there's lots of room for discussion.
I won't interrupt you. Go ahead through the whole design. I see what you're doing.
Okay. So at build time, we go out, we find the cookbooks that we don't have, we cache them. Then the next part of the build process is we build an ISO. And then we also include the cookbooks on the ISO. And a suggested location would be TFTP boot, say Berkshelf, where we have gem site would have, at the same level, would have the cookbooks in, say, a Berkshelf directory.
Okay.
So now we have a Crowbar server, and the Crowbar server has all of the required cookbooks for all bar clamps. And so the next step when you deploy...
This would be from the cache?
Yes.
Build to cache. Okay.
Screen.
Am I?
So then the next step is when you're at runtime, you're making a deployment, and say we're deploying Rabbit as an example. What would happen is where we SCP the cookbooks to the target node, we would do it the same way, but we'd pick it up from this repository, which is under TFTP boot. Right now, we pick it up from the bar clamps location.
Okay.
So this would give us a central place for holding all the cookbooks instead of having redundant cookbooks under every bar clamps directory.
So
that's about as far as I've gotten.
Okay. If you didn't have the bar clamps in those directories, couldn't you just leave the locations as is and then use Berkshelf to populate them?
So this is a good question. So the bar clamp has a Berks file. What do we do at this point? Do we have it point to the repository on the admin node and pull them down as needed? I'm not sure at that point. We could use the pattern that we're already using where we SCP the stuff down to the target node, or we could, at the target node, use Berkshelf and pull them from the repository that is on the admin node. This is kind of a question at this point.
So
how do we want to design it?
If you're using the upstreams, you wouldn't have any cookbooks in the bar clamp, right? All the bar clamps would come from Berkshelf, right?
Yes, but where do they come from, right? So we don't have internet access. So what's the flow of getting the cookbooks down to the target node?
I think that's a fundamental assumption that we're starting to turn on its head, of whether or not you have to have internet access when you do an install.
So we have been making the assumption that there is no guarantee of internet access. So if there is not internet access, we have to get the cookbooks from somewhere. And this is my proposed design.
That makes sense. So just a couple of questions. One is, if they're not in why have a separate location than the bar clamp if they wouldn't normally be populated?
Well, the way it works right now, the cookbooks are in the bar clamp, and
Right.
the jig bundles every cookbook that's in the bar clamp and SCPs it down to the target node.
Right.
What I'm suggesting is that instead of SCPing it from the bar clamp, we would SCP it from the TFTP boot repository on the admin node.
You're doing that to avoid pulling the code that's in the bar clamp by accident?
I'm doing that to avoid having multiple copies of recipes in every bar clamp. So basically building a central repository on the admin node.
I like the idea of having a repository on the admin node that everybody pulls from.
I'm not.
I mean, just basically just for how we're doing it with gems, right?
Well, this is the challenge, right? What we've found is that the current Crowbar 1 strategy is not sustainable from a maintenance perspective because the caches get stale way too fast. And so if we have to switch from using a custom-built cache to using a standard caching strategy.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I mean,
Yeah.
this is a design requirement going way back, 2 years ago. That no internet connectivity requirement, which is it's a lab bootstrapping requirement, but it's not a sustaining cluster requirement. Sustained clusters have internet access.
But what about
Yeah.
QA testing, though, right? QA, when they test it, they have to test a final stamped version that has specific versions of each gem and each upstream cookbook and each package, right? So if you go to deploy this in the field and it can just install anything that it wants, then whatever that installs hasn't been QA tested, so it's really not going to be supportable.
So I'm confused about the Burke lock capabilities. I thought that the Burke lock actually let you have a repeatable target, not trunk.
Yeah. It's just like gems. It's just like a gem lock file. So you have a gem file, which specifies the gems you need. Then you have a gem lock file, which locks in the versions of those gems. Berkshelf works exactly the same way. So we would have, in each bar clamp, we would have a Berks file and a Berks file lock.
So from that perspective, QA could replicate an exact configuration because you'd be able to use the version of the Burke. You use the versioning or the cache as the mechanism to get repeatable checkouts.
So
Is that right?
No.
Yes, one of the things that Arkady mentioned, though, was for development to not use a lock file. And I don't think that we can do that. Because if you didn't use a lock file, you'd basically be saying always pull from head. And I don't think we could be successful doing testing now.
That makes a lot of sense, though. So what you're saying is developers pull from head, and once you've got a stable version or a branch, you pull from that.
Once you have something you want QA to test, you have to have a lock file.
Yeah, I think that's all Arkady was saying, was that while we're in the process of developing and upstream cookbooks are in the process of being developed too, that we should probably not have a lock file and just point to head. But once we get to the point where we're handing off to QA, then yeah, we've got to have a lock file that's checked in.
And I would concur with that. That sounds good.
No.
I mean, we do the exact same thing with gems. It's the same workflow. That makes sense.
I'd like to
No.
to just hold where we are and take the discussion one level higher up. If you are running a Red Hat Enterprise Linux or a SUSE Enterprise Linux environment in a large corporation today, it is essential that they are able to apply security patches and updates the typical modus operandi, the typical MO that is adopted there, is that companies will have their own internal caching server for all of the updates. And only after they have in a test environment validated an update will they make it available from that server.
We're seeing that pattern with the Red Hat work we're doing.
Right. So I would propose that since that server is going to be sitting behind a firewall anyhow, that we simply make use of that to download anything we need, and that we simply provide a mechanism for making certain that the right versions, the validated versions, are available from that location. If we want to put additional controls in place through Berkshelf, I'm totally in favor of that. But I think the first line of defense and security should be controls on that caching server.
Yeah, so that's along the lines of where I was going. Two points I want to make, because I think I agree with you, John. I'm okay with the discussion around being able to lock versions of, whether it's gems or whether it's cookbooks. The reason I was saying I think there should be a repository on the admin node, there's two reasons. So one is, within the cluster, we can't be sure that all the nodes in the cluster will have internet access. Even in online mode, I don't think we can make that assumption. I think it's fair to say that the admin node will have internet access if enabled. So the reason for a repository, and I put that in quotes, or some sort of cache or repository on the admin node, is to make sure that the nodes in the cluster can get to these packages. How that repository gets updated, whether it's done from an ISO or it's done in install time, is something we need to figure out. We could either freeze it and manage it, or we could use it like a Red Hat, similar to a Red Hat satellite server, or it could be wide open access. So effectively, the admin node becomes somewhere between a cache and a proxy.
Right.
That was my argument.
And that was the design that we started Crowbar 2 with.
Yeah.
You're entirely right.
Yeah, I think the admin node should be distribution central for the cluster.
Yeah. Now, I'm not I haven't checked the current OpenStack setup, but I know in a typical Hadoop cluster, access from the nodes within the cluster to the outside world is going to be fairly limited. There may or may not be routing, but we do require access from the admin node to the outside world, where the outside world is defined as a corporate LAN that potentially gets us to an external internet.
So the admin node may or may not have internet access, but we can almost guarantee that nodes in the cluster will not be guaranteed to have internet access. So there has to be some kind of proxy, whether it's the admin node or it's John's central cache for RPMs and stuff. It's got to live somewhere.
The central cache.
That's one piece of it. Go ahead.
I interrupted you. The central cache John's talking about is just for operating system updates, but I think we need a similar concept for our other dependencies. That's all I'm saying.
Well, I think John was proposing to stick gems and upstream cookbooks there as well. Was that not what you were proposing, John?
I'm proposing that we provide a mechanism for using whatever server is used as a repository server for operating system updates, that we provide a mechanism for providing gem updates and for providing upstream cookbook updates.
What the one thing I don't like about that is owned by their IT department, right? And this means that we have to tell them that you also have to add this other stuff to your cache server.
Yeah.
So I think having our own independent gem and Berkshelf repositories is less hassle. So if we stick it on the admin node, we're safer. Whether the admin node has internet access, it can do it when we stand up Crowbar, or whether we have to do it at build time, we could have a switch that says what kind of ISO we're building. So that's one part of it, is where the cookbooks come from. But it also, we have to talk about how the Jig works. Because right now the Jig takes whatever is inside the Bar Clamps Chef Solo directory and zips it up and stuffs it on the target node. So I think we need to make a change how we do that.
So Dave, you need to work with me on this so that I can identify a mechanism, work with you to identify and implement a mechanism for getting these upstream cookbooks, because we will not be producing an ISO in the new world.
We're not going to have an ISO.
That's correct.
What's installing Crowbar?
It has to be packaged. You with me there?
Couldn't hear what John said. Can John say that again?
Whatever we need to deploy an admin node will have to be packaged in some form.
Okay,
So
and this is going to be in what form for distribution?
RPM form.
So there would be a large number of packages for a customer to download, or is it going to be like a giant zip file, or what?
To be determined. So, Dave, is that Dave speaking?
This is Shelley.
No.
Thank you.
Shelley? Let's have a separate call on that, because I need to understand how this works so that we can get an infrastructure in place for making certain that everything that is needed at install time, when we install the RPMs, gets dropped on the system. Because when we install, as I said before, the basic MO is we install Centos 6.5 on the admin node. Once that's installed, we point to a repository site, do a yum install of OpenCrowbar-installer, and that orchestrates and automates the whole process of getting the admin node up and running.
So I guess in that case, our gems would be in a package, and our recipe or cookbook cache would be in a package.
Either that,
Yeah,
or
that's
we
one way
insist
to do
on
it.
having a gem server on that update repository server.
Or
Right.
I think one of the things we need to differentiate is between an ISO and an ISO that bootstraps Crowbar. The easiest way to do an initial install might potentially be to have an ISO image that includes a lot of these dependencies so that they can be staged on the admin node. But I view that as kind of an initial prep of the cache. For online mode, we still want the option of updating that cache from external sources. So to say we won't have an ISO, I don't know if that's true, but I don't think we're not going to have an ISO that kind of bootstraps the admin node the way we did in.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying.
While we're talking about this, let me throw in a Hadoop perspective, since I think we need to keep it in mind going forward. So when we're doing a Hadoop install, the nodes that are installing Hadoop, the various recipes and the various bar clamps, will have to pull vendor packages from a vendor repository, which might be RPMs, or they potentially might be a vendor-specific format. So we will need to have that stuff accessible from the nodes. The current plan is to have those packages on the admin node, and then have the individual nodes in the cluster pull them from the admin node. On the admin node itself, it's going to act, I guess you could call it a satellite server or proxy, and we'll prime it with the right packages. But we do want to be able to control updates to that repo so that we can roll out updates selectively to the cluster. We need a good name for this concept of the proxy/cache on the admin node, whatever we call it, because I keep switching terms. But the Hadoop requirements will be, I think, generally similar to OpenStack, except we'll be serving up either RPMs or just binary images. And I think that's also true for most of our other workloads.
Okay, does that capture the issue and the questions?
Partially. So there's one way of one discussion is how this stuff gets to the admin node, and I don't really care if it's via an ISO or from an RPM install or however it gets there. But once it's there, we need to make a modification to the jig on where it bundles the stuff it's going to send down to the target node, where Chef 0 is going to execute. So right now, for instance, the database bar clamp and the messaging bar clamp have a shitload of cookbooks checked into the source tree, and there is overlap between the two, which is not the way we want to go, obviously. What we need to do is have one copy of cookbooks that live somewhere and get pushed out to the target nodes from a central place. And so we want to make this change sooner rather than later, because the next bar clamp we move on to, we're going to have to follow the same pattern where we get every cookbook dependency that that Berkshelf is going to want to install and check it into the source tree for that bar clamp, and that's ugly.
Sorry, run that by me again.
So right now, in order to make Crowbar work with the database bar clamp and the messaging bar clamp, we have to have all of the cookbook dependencies checked into the source tree. So basically, it's like running Berkshelf and downloading all of the cookbooks that it needs and checking them into our source tree. And there's overlap, so we have the same cookbooks checked into two places. Is that clear?
Yes.
Okay, and we don't want to keep continuing down that pattern.
Have I captured the needs here?
Yes.
Have
That
I
looks
captured
good.
our agreement here?
Oh, I agree with me.
I think you're definitely hitting gems and upstream cookbooks. We also need to extend that a little bit to, I believe, RPMs, packages in general.
Yeah, I mean, I'm dealing specifically with the cookbook pane right now, so I'm sure that there's similar pain in other spots.
Yeah, I mean, as soon as you deal with the cookbook pane, we're going to be dealing with the package pane beyond cookbooks. So.
Yeah, I'm sure there's Python packages as well that you're going to run to. It's the same kind of
exactly.
issue.
So we
You can in fact lock package versions within RPM. You can do an RPM lock on a package. That means it won't be updated.
Yeah. That's a slippery slope, though, depending on what RPMs they are. If they're operating system RPMs, a given cluster may want to pick up the updates from a satellite server where the updates are approved. Other RPMs, we may not want to do that. So this is why I think that
even when the update is on the satellite server, if you've locked a package at a particular version, it will not update.
On the satellite server or on the target machine?
On the target.
Okay, because the reason I'm asking is there are certain things like operating system updates are something that may be controlled by a policy outside of Crowbar, what can be installed or what must be installed. But we have to worry about our dependencies. And this is why I like the concept that the admin node in some way, well, it doesn't have to be the admin node, but I think it's the logical place. In some way, we have a place where some of those packages can be cached or proxied.
Okay. Have I captured in notes here everything that we've expressed as concerns? Have I missed anything?
Well, we need to change the jig.
Where?
So the chef jig needs to change on how it retrieves and ships down the cookbooks to the node. I'm actually trying to get onto sync in right now, so I can add some notes.
Can you get onto the sync in and edit it as you speak, please?
Yeah, that's what I'm trying to do right now, John.
Good, thank you.
Rather than you have to do it.
Yeah. I don't want to nitpick here, but I'm not sure what you mean, John, by RPM package versions must be capable of being locked.
That means
Are,
get updated.
yeah, but who's, I guess my clarification is, are we specifying the lock? Is an administrator externally? I mean, we know they're capable of being locked, so that's a statement of fact. I'm just trying to understand who's specifying the version. Is it on the Crowbar side or is it upstream? That's what I meant. I know I'm nitpicking a little, but
Does that capture, if you clarify that?
I think so. I'm kind of loosely assuming that there will be either a repository or a proxy to a repository on the admin node that will take care of this.
Yeah, we haven't defined that yet, but that's what I'm assuming. Actually, that's going to be determined by whatever deploys a package. If we want to lock a package at a particular version that is available, that has been set as locked on the admin node, then we should automatically, whenever we deploy that package onto a target node, we should lock it on that target node also. So what that means is we need a bar clamp that handles version locking for RPM packages for gems and for cookbooks.
Well, you know what? I'm not sure it needs to be locked as much as, you know, when it goes to the source for that RPM, if the update isn't available, then it's effectively locked by controlling it through the source. But we're getting down into implementation details.
So, John, I've tried to log in to sync in, and it can't seem to find any of my email addresses as a valid account, so I can't get onto the system.
Let me go to my own. Oh no, my laptop's locked up. Dave, after this call, I will set you. Let me try to do it now. I'm going to try to set you up.
Yeah, I don't think I have an account there right now.
Okay. How do I get in there? All right, I'm having a look. Okay, I'm into admin. I'm gonna have to.
If you want to do it offline, John, I can add notes afterwards, so we don't have to make people wait for me to get an account.
Yeah, let's do that later. Sorry, guys. Tried to help someone dynamically. Doesn't always work too well. All right, where are we heading now? How are we doing for time? We have 10 minutes left. Have we dealt this topic to death, or are we still running on it? I don't want to rush anyone.
I think we've got the high points.
Rob is back. I'm going to hand back to him.
Hey, everybody, sorry I stepped out. And you handed back to me. I had no idea where we are.
We dealt with the online mode issues.
Oh, good.
While you're out. I've taken notes here.
And this is actually, it ends up exposing a much broader topic of how the admin node will operate in the future. It's good.
So we have 9 minutes left. What else do we need to cover? Because we're not going to cover everything that we set as our goals.
No, this is actually really useful. I think what we've done is we've identified topics that we're going to be resolving in the next sprint or two as we continue to flesh out the admin node capability, and that's reasonable. Do people have questions that we were expecting to bump into in the next sprint that we want to talk about?
Right. I think we could.
Well, Rob, I think you might have stepped out during one part. We were talking about the change that needs to happen to the jig. I think that the jig is going to need to be modified to read the Berks file, and from the Berks file then go to wherever we are caching the cookbooks and bundle them from there, instead of just bundling everything that's under the chef's directory in the bar clamp.
That sounds like a really good plan. I like that. That's really
Dave isn't able to get into edit.
Yeah, I don't have an account, so after this call we'll get an account.
I forgot to set the page to public. There you go.
Is that what the problem is?
Yeah, the security. You can set the logged in sign-in users can change it. I'm glad you pointed that out.
Can you get in now, Dave?
I'm typing away. So it is community planning meeting.
So I know that in this sprint I'm going to have published the documentation for doing the Docker admin nodes, and we probably want people to try and replicate that environment. So that'll be really useful to do. We do that, and then the other thing that we're going to have to figure out how to do is bring a workload into the OpenCrowbar environment.
Yes.
I don't see that as particularly painful, but we should surface it on the community a little bit and then start implementing it.
Well, are we going to have a facility for dynamically bringing in additional functionality?
Yeah. So let me rephrase that. So I wouldn't expect you to be able to do it from the website, from the web UI, because I think that that's a security issue. But I would expect that you could install a bar clamp with access to the admin node and have it added into the environment.
There will be two mechanisms. One is dropping the files onto the admin node, and the other is by packaging it and putting it on.
I think they are the same thing. I think you would install an RPM, and the RPM would do the necessary things to add itself.
Well, that one's easy because the RPM packaging can run whatever process is necessary.
Mm-hmm.
It would be a lot easier if it was not necessary to run any external process. Simply dropping the file in place will have it detect.
Yeah, you need to do a database migration. There's a need you have to do a database migration, you have to add the engine. So there's some things that you have that are required. So right now, in the Crowbar 2 code base, the non-open Crowbar piece, every bar clamp is a dedicated engine, and so we extend the rails server with every bar clamp. In the OpenCrowbar design, what I've done is the bar clamps are actually not distinct engines. Only a workload level would be a new engine. So all the mechanisms are in there, but it's significantly simpler to attach them because there's only one engine per workload edition. So that should be a new engine. The classes, I kept all the bar clamp classes and the way we structure it, but it's all together in one thing.
Can we use FAM as a trigger to do the migrations?
No idea.
That's a file access monitor.
I don't know. We can talk. We can bring that up in design as we talk about it. I really don't think it's very hard. We have to execute additional migrations. We know how to do that. We have to add in an engine, which is a very well-known process. Those things seem pretty straightforward.
Can we document that?
What I'd like to document is that we're going to discuss it in the community. And that's actually what's in here. So the tasks are packaging. We have to have the migrations added, and we have to have the rail engine included.
I would add one item there, which is potential for automation.
What do you need?
As automate, if we just drop another bar clamp in there, or how will it automatically be integrated? Discovery.
Yeah. Cool. All right, we're at the top of the hour. Any other last topics before we close the call? All right, everybody. I appreciate you taking the time. I feel like we're having really positive discussions with a lot of effective documentation coming out. So thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, guys.